Hey folks, good morning. Today I'm going to try to summarize what I did to swap a 460 into a 78 Bronco. And I have prepared a file here that I'll walk through. So first off, I'm going to only be sharing what really worked for me. This is not a guide for just about every scenario, just strictly what worked for me. First off, why a 460 and not the 400 the Bronco came with? So the Bronco came with a really nice 400 under build, but it had sat for 3 years due to circumstances in the seller's life. But it was going to be a lot of work to actually go build that 400. But then the good news is the bell housing of the 400 and 460 are the same, so I decided to go with the 460 that I got of a 86 Ford pickup. And good thing is 460 even in stock form makes over 380 foot-pounds of torque, and that's probably going to be equal to a built 400. So I just decided to go with the 460. So with regards to the references, this link here was an excellent reference. So this website here, projectbronco.com, they talk about what it'll take to do a 460 in a Bronco. This was pretty much my first thing I read. And then, last but not least, with regards to references, you have Gary's Garage Mahal, which without which the build would have not gone as smoothly as it did. So over here, you have me documenting the whole journey. And then you'll see a lot of help here from Gary, Lewis, and Jim. And thank you so much, guys. And you'll probably see a lot of discussion here that might be helpful. And there's numerous others on this forum that have helped me. So thank you, everyone. So yeah, there's everything, pretty much whatever links I have on this file here, I also have it down here. So make sure to check that out. So I'll start with the source truck, the 460 that came off the 86 F250. So this truck here, I have much thanks for. I got this at an auction where it was pretty much totaled out for a front end impact. This was too clean a truck to take the 460 from, but it was the best thing that could get my Bronco rolling, so I had to do it. As you can see here, the 460 is gone. The C6 is sitting there. I did use the torque converter that came on this C6 and the original flex plate for the Bronco. As you can see here, pretty much everything is intact. I haven't moved much except the engine and all the drive belt stuff. I did dump the oil filter adapter that the truck came with and the oil cooler. I didn't use it, so I'll go into that some more. Next, I'm going to be going over the motor mounts. I used the Trans-Adapt 4225 motor mount, and these are an extremely good bang for the buck. They are only at this point $67, and I mean, that's a tremendous value for the money. And I'll show you how they worked out. It's hard to see, but those are installed just fine. They adapted just fine. And here's the other one. So these are solid motor mounts. The only thing I had to do was, I don't know if it was due to the motor mount, but the transmission, well, the engine motor mounts wouldn't get into the holes in the frame purchase unless I scooted back the transmission and everything by probably a 1/4 inch. That's the only thing that I had to do. I don't know if that's the motor mounts at fault or just the swap in the 460 versus the 400. want to spend a minute talking about how I installed the engine. So the radiator spout, grill, bumper was all out of the way, so the whole front was open, made it so much easier to work on it. So the transmission was already there. All I did was install the torque converter, stabbed it 3 times as they say. Then I installed the engine to the transmission, got the bell housing bolts in, and that whole time I didn't have the motor mounts on the engine yet. The motor mounts were put on after the mating was done. That made it just a little bit easier to play around with the room that we had here. And power steering, basically what worked was I kept the power steering pump from the 86 pickup, and the original gearbox was not good, so I replaced it, but this is what goes on a 78 Bronco. The high side pressure line and low side pressure lines, I kept what was standard for the 400. They adapt just fine to this pump here. And what else? Smog pump is gone, of course. Alternator, that's all from the 86 pickup. Heater hoses, these are from the 400. And that's about it. And I'm running an electric fuel pump, which is mounted outside the tank. And here's a pressure regulator, keeps the fuel pressure at about 4.5 with the engine running. Next I'm going to go over the oil filter adapter. So the thing with the 80s Ford pickups with the 460 is they had an oil filter adapter which adapted to an angled fitting of the oil filter, whereas on this 78 Bronco the oil filter is attached straight to the block like that. There's no adapters or anything like that, except the one that helps the oil filter thread into the block, which I'll show you right now. So this adapter here worked perfectly. Now it says it's for a Ford 302 351 Windsor, but that works on a 460 as well, just right. Next, go into a timing chain. So I'll credit Jim over at the forum for getting me down this path, and I'm glad he did. But basically, it's a really good idea if you have factory retarded timing. Typically a carbureted 460 was retarded in the 80s, and EFI until 1997 was straight up timed. So this is the timing chain I used, and it worked perfectly. And it had 3 different keyway settings, and of course I went with the one that set it at straight up timing. And also you will have nylon gears on some of the 460s back in that time, and more than likely those sprockets or the nylon from those sprockets, Delrin, I don't know what that exact material is, but it probably chipped off, and you're probably dealing with a loose chain, so I highly recommend you do this. Next we'll move on to the radiator. So I kept the stock radiator that came with the 400, and it worked really well. I didn't have too many issues. Now the upper and lower radiator hoses. So the upper one it's basically the hoses that were standard for the 400. The upper one is a Gates 21045. It needed a slight bit of trimming to fit this, make this turn exactly right without issues. Now the lower radiator hose was the Gates 21053. It was a perfect fit right out of the gate. And as you can see here, goes to the radiator and then loops around the belts and everything, and installs onto the water pump just right. So next, moving on to the exhaust. So this is probably the most challenging part. A lot of people mess up here. People go with headers and things like that, and I realized pretty early that was not going to work. So I just kept factory manifolds that came off the 460, and honestly it's pretty well set up for a 460 from that time frame, and I don't see why headers would be needed. So I just kept that, and let's see. What was super helpful is this product here, Walker 41276. This is what I used to hook up to the factory manifold, and I'll show you real quick how that worked out. So this exhaust was fully welded up by me with parts off the shelf at the local parts store. So that is all that's left off that hookup that I showed you. And let me show you on this side. And as you can see here, over here, only that much of that is left. And I had to trim some of that flange so it made a tight fit against the manifold. And then this is all 2.5 inch pipe, and I had to trim it there, and that's what gave me the angles that I needed. And as you can see here, this is all 2.5 inch piping. This was a lot of work to get it to fit just right. And on this side, I wanted to make sure that there was enough room to keep it away from the exhaust, away from oil pan and stuff like that. So there's a lot of room here, and I can remove stuff without messing up. And then this one area I had to kind of hammer away just so it stayed away from that front drive shaft. And over here I have a ball and cup flange that I'll show you the part number for. This is easy to disconnect. And we come to a Walker large muffler. This is really quiet. Now there's an extra muffler that Jim suggested from Bear River Converters. I really wish I used it, but my wife told me it was very critical that the exhaust be as quiet as possible. So I went with the Walker one, so this here is the cup side of that exhaust. Then I'll pull up the ball side. And here's the ball side of that. These two, they all pair together, makes it so easy to remove the exhaust later down the line. And then the mufflers that I showed you, the one that I used, took 2.5 inch on two sides. It's the Walker Quiet Flow 21533, 2.5 inlets and then 3-inch outlet. Then here's the Bear River converter option that I mentioned. These do appear to be better built. I would recommend you check them out. Now on the emission side, this is probably very important. So I did remove the smog crossover pipes that were in the back before I installed it in the Bronco. Now this video here is an excellent watch where this gentleman does exactly the same thing. He removes these crossover pipes and installs 43 by 64 expansion plugs, and those, I recommend you check out this video. And then I'm pretty darn sure these are the plugs that I used, Dorman 555120, but I don't remember. It's been a while, so that's why I should have made this video sooner. Then on the EGR side of things, I did require a couple of things. Let me go into the details here shortly. So that's the EGR plate. I kept it. Then my goal was to seriously run EGR, and I might still, but I'm finding that EGR, with the EGR, the engine, sometimes there's some misfire. So at the moment I'm not running it, but if you want to run it, you will need this vacuum delay valve, and you'll need the vacuum control valve that will basically give the EGR vacuum after the engine is hot. Maybe this valve is switching too soon for EGR. I may need to find another one. This one I think switches over at 140. Maybe it needs to be delayed up until 160 or hotter. So I don't know what the problem is. Maybe my distributor is set up for no EGR. I don't know exactly what's going on yet. But I still kept that base plate because that's how these carburetors will mount just right to that original intake manifold. And which brings me to, I decided to just keep the original intake manifold. I didn't install anything aluminum or anything fancy like that. There's the link for the vacuum delay valve. You can see the part number there. And then this here is a pretty important one. A lot of people don't find this part too easily. So this is the PCV grommet for valve cover. It says 67 to 71 Ford truck, and there's the part number. But it is the only thing that I found that has worked for a 460. So that's a perfect fit. Highly recommend that part there. Okay, now on the AC side of things, what I did is I kept the compressor and just all the brackets that came from that Ford truck, but everything else is what was on the 400. The only thing that I had to do was hook up this harness, Doberman harness. Forgot the part number there, but I can provide that in the comments. And that basically adapts the clutch control wire, or it adapts the clutch control signal or power to this compressor. And then this piece of thing was invaluable, so it was required to move the fitting from the high side of the compressor to the high side hose that was on the 400. And here's that part. I'm so glad I found this one. So these are Vintage Air U-Bendum refrigerant lines. This particular one takes, it's 18 inches length, and it takes number 8 male to a number 8 female. And then I had to install these R134A ports for this FS6 compressor. And this is Mr. Fomoco Motorcraft's eBay store. His name is John, and I highly recommend you give him a call, and he'll take care of you. And then on the carburetor, this is a Edelbrock 1411, and got it at Summit Racing, and it works really well. It's got an electric choke, which I'm pretty sure you know how to wire. And then these things are pretty critical, and Jim helped me identify these. So this is the EGR to the carb gasket. Now these are Felpro reproductions of the original Motorcraft part. So this is the one that takes helps you adapt the EGR plate to the intake. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this one is the one that adapts the carburetor to the EGR plate. It's a really thick gasket, and it's got these plastic grommets, so you can't over torque and bend the flange. And then intake to EGR, that's a special gasket. You have to use these gaskets on the stock intake manifold, or else you will have a vacuum leak. So these are specialized gaskets that are based on a Motorcraft part. And then this throttle linkage was kind of a pain to find. So 78 Bronco uses a throttle rod. Unfortunately, the original rod seized up, so this rod worked perfectly. As you can see here, it curves perfectly right to where it hooks up into the carburetor. And there's the part number there. And I found it on this eBay page, and it was a really good fit at a very affordable price. And that's how the packaging looked, and you can see the part number there. So that pretty much concludes everything I wanted to talk about in this video. So hopefully, if you have more questions, you can reach out to me on the comments or send me an email. Thanks. And no such video is complete without a test drive, which I'm going to take you on. can see the exhaust is pretty quiet, and this is kind of the feeling we wanted from this Bronco. Wanted to be a defined machine where you feel the torque, not based on sound. So yeah, it moves. It's not going to be no track machine, but a comfortable, hopefully a comfortable daily drive. That completes my video, so I can go back to driving two-handed. There's my temperature and oil pressure gauge after running for about 5 minutes. The gauges here also work, but those are more handy. There's the vacuum after it's fully been running. Pretty good.